Beowulf by Unknown, illustrated by Tori Chavez. The story opens up with a tale about Scyld, a mysterious and great man who earned the honor of everyone surrounding him. In his life, he earned renown and fame, both of which were spread all across Scandinavian lands. Scyld soon met his time with death, leaving his friends and loved ones saddened with his departure. They placed his body on a large boat which was bountiful with treasure. The death of this great king marked the end of his reign, but would mark the start of a long lineage of rulers as great as him. Hrothgar endured a many and long battle during a war that had happened. His success in the war granted him honor in battle, earning him many young warriors that would gladly grow and serve him until the end. Suddenly, Hrothgar, king of the Danes, wished to have a grand mead hall constructed for his men. This mead hall would be greater than any mead hall seen by his men and by everyone else. This great hall would be known as Heorot. It stood tall, adorned with golden horns. It was also built to stand fires and the surges of war, guaranteed to stand anything thrown at it. Except they weren't prepared for the mighty stalker Grendel. This grim spirit lived during the time of the giants, condemned by the Almighty for being of Cain's race. From his lonesome abode, Grendel listened to the joy and merriment from the great hall. "These people who know no sorrow or hardship gallantly dance and feast," growled Grendel. Grendel waited until the night grew darker and the men grew sleepier. He then set out at twilight to do his bidding. Grendel made his way to the mead hall, where the merry soldiers were once feasting. He looked upon the now sleeping soldiers and tore into them. He slaughtered 30 thanes, leaving the mead halls bloody with gore. Hrothgar awoke the next morning with the terrible news. A horrible fiend had come and killed 30 of his men. He hoped that there could be a way to get Grendel to stop. But to no avail, for Grendel wanted nothing to do with the Danish army. No gold, mere talk, or remorse could stop Grendel's horrible deeds. He came in and slaughtered for many seasons, no one being able to stop him. Fortunately, 15 brave soldiers boarded a ship over to these troubled lands in hopes to help. The boat carrying these people from another land finally arrived. The Watcher of the Sea hustled down from his tower to ask these strange men questions. One man spoke for the group. The watchman waited until he finished before leading them to their desired destination. The Watchman of the Sea led the band of men to a certain point in the road to return back to his post. Another of Hrothgar's men had ran down and met these strangers. He asked who they were and their purpose of coming. Beowulf, the speaker of the group, told them that he was the son of Ecgtheow, and that he wished to speak to Hrothgar. The soldier ran back and alerted Hrothgar of the situation. Hrothgar agreed to speak with Beowulf and hear what he had to say. Beowulf heard of the terrible doings of Grendel that plagued them for many seasons. He proposed that he would be the one to defeat Grendel, or he would die trying. With the news of Beowulf readying to take on Grendel, a feast was thrown to celebrate. During this time of merriment, Unferth approaches Beowulf and reminds him of the time he threw himself into dangerous waters over a bet. Beowulf replies by saying he grew stronger in the water and fought many sea creatures, unlike Breca, his competitor in this past sea race. He also slips in the fact that Unferth killed his brother, an action that is worse than diving into the deep sea. Though Unferth's attempts at humiliating didn't work, it led to a great speech by Beowulf. Upon the completion of the speech, Wealhtheow, Hrothgar's queen, greeted the men in the hall. She went around and offered the full cup to the men and passed it around to everyone. When it reached Beowulf, he gave another short speech that pleased both Wealhtheow and Hrothgar. However, while Beowulf and his men enjoyed themselves, Grendel prepared for another relentless attack. The men slept soundly on the floor as Grendel creeped in. Upon arrival, Grendel tore up, slaughtered, and ate one of the sleeping soldiers. Before he could move on to the next victim, Beowulf got up and began his fight. Grendel moved on and reached to kill Beowulf next, but was quickly stopped when Beowulf grabbed his arm. Beowulf immediately sat up against Grendel's arm in an attempt to disarm him. It wasn't long before Grendel soon realized that he has met his match, but there was little he could do now. The sinews in his arm began to break and his joints burst. At the end of it all, Grendel was mortally wounded and Beowulf had ripped off his claw. People from far and wide joined the celebration of Grendel's death. Warriors young and old joined Hrothgar's people in seeing the tracks of the falling Grendel. Hrothgar himself also joined the warriors in the celebration at the mead hall, giving Beowulf a helmet, a byrnie, a bright banner, and the sword of Healfdene. Beowulf showed no shame in receiving all these gifts on top of receiving the full cup. It was because of Beowulf that the soldiers could sleep soundly, for Grendel's reign of terror was over. However, while the soldiers celebrated their triumph, another mourned the death of her son. Grendel's mother, a much more terrifying opponent, would break into the mead hall to avenge her son. She killed Aesir, Hrothgar's close friend and advisor, and quickly fled back to her home in the fearsome waters below. Hrothgar grieved greatly at the news of his good friend's death. He gave a speech and offered Beowulf a great reward if he could stop the evil who killed Aesir. With this, Beowulf geared up with armor and the hunting sword given to him. He mounted a horse and made his way to where Grendel's mom might be. Beowulf and his men arrived at the sea cliff and discovered the severed head of Aesir. Behind him, a water of blood and gore boiled, while many sea serpents and monsters plagued the waters below. Unferthed and backed out of his promise he made when he was drunk with wine, Beowulf, the son of Ecgtheow, told his men that he would risk his life to go forth into these waters. If he did not make it out alive, he would give his gold to them. Grendel's mom seized him when he entered. Her grip was strong, but her attempts to harm Beowulf failed since he wore his trusted chainmail. Beowulf counterattacked with his sword, but to no avail. Grendel's mom was also immune to swords. Grendel's mom took this opportunity to wound him with her sword, but, to her surprise, her attacks didn't work. Taking this chance, Beowulf seized her sword, desperate for his life, and struck her in the neck. The blade cut through her flesh, leaving Grendel's mom dead on the chamber floor. Beowulf left her body and went to explore the chambers. In these chambers he looked on the floor and saw Grendel's lifeless body. He raised his arm and watched his body burst as he sliced his head clean off. The men that waited outside while Beowulf fought grew worried when he hadn't returned. The bloody water was soon thought to be Beowulf's blood, when it was actually the opposite. Below, where they thought Beowulf had died, Beowulf swam to the shore with treasures and Grendel's head. The men on land rejoiced at the sight and brought him and his treasures back to Hrothgar. Another feast was thrown for the great Beowulf. However, this time was different. Beowulf was returning to his home, telling Hrothgar that he would help again should the moment arrive. Beowulf soon returned to his home in Geatland. He brought back treasures and a great story about everything he did in the Danish coast. Hygelac, the prince, was astonished with everything Beowulf accomplished and awarded him with 7,000 hides of land, a hall, and a princely throne. Unfortunately, the two friends, Beowulf and Hygelac, left for a battle with the Germanic tribe. It was here when Hygelac, and eventually the next in line, tragically passed away, leaving Beowulf to become king of this land. A great responsibility fell into the hands of the great Beowulf, but it was a position he held well for 50 winters. However, during Beowulf's ascension to the throne, another problem began their reign. A fearsome dragon who had quietly hoarded their treasures stirred awake when an unwelcome visitor stole the goblet. Unable to find nothing but a footprint, the dragon took to the skies to take his revenge on the thief. This threat upon his land left Beowulf no choice but to take arms against him. Confident in his previous battles, Beowulf takes his trusted shield and a few men to face off the dragon. Beowulf then selects his 11 men that will accompany him in his journey to the dragon's lair. Luckily for Beowulf, he finds the thief and forces him to take him to this lair unknown to man. Upon arrival, Beowulf and his men share stories and good tidings for the dire battle ahead. Beowulf and his men step inside the vicious dragon's lair. Beowulf and the dragon fight long and hard, even though Beowulf's strength is failing him. Suddenly, Beowulf is encircled in the dragon's flames, causing all but one to run for their lives. Wiglaf, the only one who didn't flee, joined Beowulf in his fight against the dragon. Using his ancient sword, he struck the dragon, seriously wounding him. Beowulf then charged at the dragon, dealing the final blow. The battle had ended, but all was not well, for the mighty dragon had sunk his teeth into Beowulf's neck. Beowulf had conquered the beast, but was mortally wounded in return. He stopped the menace from attacking his land, and in return, the dragon avenged his death. As Beowulf lay dying, Wiglaf listened to what Beowulf had to say, and stood by him until the end. News of Beowulf's death spread across the land, and soon the news of those who abandoned him in his time of need would spread too. A great grave pyre was constructed for Beowulf, and he was buried with his treasure. Some questioned his choice on facing the dragon, but it was too late to change anything now.